I found evidence that my parents may not be my real parents. I, Michelle, 26 years old, recently experienced a tragedy. My parents, who have always been a bit eccentric, lived minimally dependent on society. This meant using well water, their own sewer or septic system, solar and propane for power, etc. They weren't conspiracy theorists, though many of their friends were. They lived in a very old house that relied on propane for heating. Unfortunately, there was a breakdown with the water heater, and they succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning in their sleep. It has been a very difficult time for me. I was the one who figured out they had passed. My mother messaged me every single day, and when I didn't get one last week, I knew something was wrong and called for a welfare check. My boyfriend, though supportive when he can be there, hasn't been available much since the day I discovered their passing. So, I've been dealing with this largely on my own. Everything is happening so quickly that I haven't even had a minute to process what's happened. I made the trip to West Virginia this past weekend. After handling their cremation, I went to their house. I stayed at a nearby hotel, though nearby meant a 45-minute drive away. During the day, I was getting the house in order. It was just too much to stay in the house overnight by myself. My mother had saved a lot of mementos and photos. It was kind of nice going through them. To give some background on my life, my parents moved back to West Virginia when I was 20. My grandfather, who I would see once or twice a year, took care of the place for 20 years while we traveled around the country for my father's work. My father would travel back to visit my grandpa every December, but my mom and I never went with him. When I did see my grandpa, he always came to us. My father made money doing doomsday prep work. He wasn't a prepper himself, but we traveled to various places like Montana, Utah, and many areas in the Rocky Mountains. He would do construction work on bunkers, security fences, and outposts. My dad knew how to do all of this stuff and had a few other guys he could call in for help when necessary. He always said he got these jobs because he would work for cash, leave no paper trail, and be discreet. It wasn't cheap for these people. We were always moving during my childhood, and I was homeschooled. I was never denied access to the internet or taught crazy things. My parents emphasized self-reliance. I later realized they believed this to an extreme degree. You'd be surprised how fast I can fix car problems or how well I can throw knives. They also prioritized my health. I went to the doctor when necessary and was vaccinated. I mention this because, whenever I tell people about my parents, they often assume they were crazy anti-vax, anti-government types, which they were not. As I got older, I began to ask, beg really, to go to a real high school. My parents caved, and we moved to Burlington, Colorado. It was an adjustment, but I loved being around people for longer than a few months at a time. To get back to the point, I noticed something alarming while going through old pictures. My mother had a habit of backing up photos on zip drives. I was looking at photos labeled Michelle's First Thanksgiving. This didn't set off any alarms until I started looking through Michelle's First Christmas. I was noticeably smaller. I know pictures can look different because of angles, but I was smaller in every angle, every picture. I also had much more hair. Yes, it had been a month, but there was no way I grew that much hair in 30 days. All the pictures before Christmas were in or around this very house. Starting that Christmas, they were of my parents' camper and the various rentals and campsites we lived in until I started high school. I don't remember this house at all, having come here for the first time when I was 20. But the pictures make it seem like they moved out overnight around Christmas and never came back. On top of that, there is one folder that has me pulling my hair out. Of the hundreds of folders on the 24 or so zip drives, there is one password-protected folder dating from December 2013. I need to know what's in this folder. I've decided to overnight the zip drive to my boyfriend back in Colorado. He has some friends who think they might be able to hack into it. I guess the last thing I want to ask is, do I seem paranoid? Is this just grief? I feel bad questioning this, as I loved my parents very much. It just feels like something is off. I'll update in a few days if I get any news on the zip drive or if I find anything else. 2 days ago, my boyfriend Aaron, 29M, sent me an email with everything that was in the protected folder. His friend was able to get into it. I am beyond disturbed. There were only 3 photos. One of a little girl in the Thanksgiving photos, dressed up in the prettiest little dress and shoes with a stuffed unicorn next to her. She appears to be asleep, although my mind is telling me it's a sadder reality than that. The second photo is of my mother holding the child in the dress, with tears in her eyes. The last photo was of a wooden box with very ornate details on the front and sides. The picture, however, is kind of far away, making it difficult to make out the wording on the front, but I had my suspicions. I spent the whole night looking at these photos and many others. I think this was my parents' actual biological child. I think she died, and I'm starting to worry that they took me from somewhere. At first, I considered the possibility that I was a twin, but there are no photos with 2 babies. This new revelation has me constantly wondering if this child is buried in the spot. The spot is what I call this odd place on my family's land, offset from the main house, where an old tree has grown. I never came here until I was 20. My father came back every year in early December. My mother was always somber during the time he was gone, and they would be oddly affectionate when he returned. Not that my parents weren't affectionate with each other, it just always seemed more upon his return for a few days. Once they moved back here, I began to notice that the spot always seemed to have flowers on it. It would have a wreath at Christmas. I asked about it 2 or 3 years ago, and they both said it was just a reminder of the family members, yes plural, that had passed. I always accepted that as their way of remembering their ancestors. I did something yesterday that I really struggled with internally. I dug up the spot. I feel bad, especially because of what I found. I found the box. I didn't open it, I know what was inside. On the front, my name was carved into it. Michelle Kimberly Nolan, May 19, 2013 to December 5, 2013. This is the body of my parents' biological daughter. I realized I was adopted, or kidnapped, or bought. I went back to digging through my parents' house during the day and looking at photos at night. I hadn't paid much attention to the other people in many of the photos. Then I took a closer look at my father's only photo from his time in the Marines. He never liked to talk about it, and I never pushed. This photo is of him and one other man. I looked through the photos of 2013, and this man is in a few from that year, including Thanksgiving. He first appears in my mother's photos in 2012. In all, he appears in only 10 or so pictures. Today, I made the decision to visit my grandfather. He lives in a nursing home and has Alzheimer's. I wasn't expecting much. He apparently has some moments of being lucid, but those are very few and far between. The nurses did tell me he will occasionally speak of things that happened decades earlier. I went there hopeful to find out anything about this man. My grandfather wasn't able to say much of anything, he just kind of sat there as I talked to him. However, when I put the picture in front of him and pointed at the man, he began to nod a little. Eventually, he started to mumble, and finally get clearer, Chris. He just kept saying it over and over, Chris. 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 I was a little shaken, honestly, and I wondered if this man still lives around here. As I passed by the nurse's station on my way out, one asked me, "How was Mr. Nolan today?" I said, "Oh, as good as expected." "Can I ask if you have ever seen this man?" My grandpa said his name is Chris. The first nurse said no, but the second nurse, who came over to look, grew bright-eyed. "Oh my God, I have to look. I swear that's him." She pulled her phone out and began looking something up. Oh my God, I was right, that is Christopher Curry. I'm a huge true crime fan, I would recognize him anywhere. I was startled by that. Who is he? She was more than ready to tell me everything. Christopher Curry, from the Merry Christmas Massacre. He burned his whole family alive on Christmas Eve, shot his sister a bunch of times, she actually survived if you can believe it, kidnapped her baby, whose body they never found, then turned himself in. Oh my God, it's like my favorite case. He only lived like 3 towns from here. You should watch the Netflix documentary on him, it's called Burning Lies. I thanked her and cut the conversation short. When I got back to my hotel room, I searched for the documentary on Netflix. I just finished watching it. It is literally the most horrible thing I've ever seen. I cried through most of it. When they showed the picture of his sister Alicia holding her baby, I paused it. That is the same baby from my first Christmas photo in the camper. I am Ivy Rose West, the baby he took that night. How were my parents okay with this? They had to have known what he was going to do to those people. I get grief over the loss of their baby, but to go along with that? I feel sick, I can't even breathe. They were so great, and yet they let him do that. How? I don't know what I am going to do next. I'm retrieving their ashes tomorrow, and I am supposed to spread them on the spot. That's where they always said they wanted to be put. Now I know why. It's all so messed up. I really wish I hadn't gone looking. I returned to Colorado and told my boyfriend, Aaron, about everything I figured out. We watched the documentary together. He remarked on how much I looked like Alicia. I hadn't even really thought about that the first time as I was so preoccupied with the baby girl. We had a few long discussions about what my next move would be. There were 2 things I wanted to do. Alicia West, who changed her name after the documentary 15 years ago to Alicia Curry West, now makes her living as a public speaker. She mostly travels to high schools giving speeches on honesty and adversity. I know that sounds ironic considering how this whole thing started. I was looking on her website, and she tells a very similar tale to the documentary. Her personal statement talks about how she owns her past lies and gives inspirational speeches about being honest, and the potential consequences of deceit seems appropriate. Their tagline is, "From self-centered to selfless." There is also a lot about overcoming adversity, how she overcame the loss of her child and family, about recovery from her gunshot wounds, and how she faced Chris Curry in court. It looks like she takes donations and is big on supporting victims of domestic violence. She has a whole foundation dedicated to ending family violence, and the public speaking appears to be the main fundraiser. It's all very over the top, but I guess when you go through all of that and come out the other side, it's hard not to be. There is a full section dedicated to finding her daughter, Finding Me, with a reward offer, old pictures, and aged pictures. It's kinda what I look like. I took the contact information for the Finding Ivy section and sent an email to it. I included some of the photos from my parents with Chris and photos of me from Christmas that year. I wanted her to know I was serious, that I wanted to meet and would be happy to get a DNA test. I included my phone number in the email. About 6 hours later, I got a call, and it was Alicia herself on the other end. She was crying. Then I began to cry. My boyfriend was listening but stayed quiet. We talked and talked. She asked me all about my life. I could tell from her tone that she had a vile opinion of my parents. I can't blame her, they allowed this to happen. We agreed to do a paternity test, and she said she would happily pay for it. When our call ended, her assistant came on and gave me all the details I would need. I just had to submit my sample to a local lab, give them Alicia's code, and we would have immediate results. The next day I did just that, and the lab tech told me it was a perfect match. Alicia was my mother. I guess she had a notification set up because I got a call immediately. She sounded almost hysterical and wanted to fly me out to Chicago as soon as possible. I was already on day 9 of my 10-day bereavement. I called my boss. He listened to my entire fantastical story. And told me he couldn't give me any more bereavement but would approve PTO for as much as I had earned. I decided to take it. I had about a month's worth. I called Alicia back and said I'd be glad to come to Chicago, but I wanted to make a stop first. She asked where, and I told her it might be triggering. She just said back to me, Fort Madison. I said yes, I want to confront my uncle. She asked me to wait. She wanted to talk to me about something important first. She booked me 2 tickets for the next day, first class to Chicago. Erin came with me, and Alicia had a car pick us up at the airport. Her office was amazing. When Erin and I arrived, we did all the usual pleasantries. Alicia hugged me and seemed like she didn't want to let go. She looked incredible for someone who was 51 years old. After the introductions, she asked Erin for some girl time. We talked for hours about everything: pole vaulting, high school, my upbringing, her family, my real father, her job, my job, and so on. It was really great to get to know her. She did have a bit of an arrogant vibe, but being a successful philanthropist, I guess, comes with a little bit of that. Alicia insisted that we stay at her house. It was huge. I couldn't believe she was making this much. I asked her about it, and she said it was Netflix money. The next day I awoke early, and she was happy to see that I was up. She asked me to come into the office with her. She gave me a bit of a tour of her operation, and I met some of the people. They didn't seem as friendly or happy as I would have expected people doing the selfless work they do. Although, I guess they work with a lot of victims of domestic violence, and I'm sure that takes its toll on them. After the tour, Alicia sat me down and told me she had a business proposition for me. I was a bit surprised. She began talking about how Burning Lies had been one of the most popular documentaries in Netflix history, and that when she contacted them, letting them know we had been reunited, they were eager to do a follow-up. It would be a lot of money for both of us. I think she could see the uncertainty in my eyes because her whole tone changed. She started talking softer. I could tell she was trying to empathize with me. I asked her what this would entail. She said they definitely want to do an interview with the 2 of us together, and they'd like to film my confrontation with Chris. I was really apprehensive about this. I had no idea how I would react when I actually saw him in person. She assured me that I would be safe in every way. Erin could be there, she would be there, whatever I needed. She also told me it was unlikely I would get my chance any other way. Chris had denied Alicia numerous times over the years, even during the documentary. If Netflix was involved, the higher-ups at the prison would make Chris do it, but without that, it was unlikely I'd get an audience with him. I told her I needed to think about it. She said that was expected and to take my time. Erin and I are both here in Alicia's house now. He's relaxing while I type this out. He's been no help. He just tells me to do what I think is best, and he backs me 100%. While I appreciate that, I really just want somebody to tell me what to do right now. I am so conflicted, this is so much all at once. 2 weeks ago, I was Michelle Nolan and had just lost my parents in a tragic accident. Now I'm Ivy West, and I've got a major studio wanting to watch while I confront my mass murderer uncle. I don't know what to do. I need to know if this is the right thing to do. A big part of me wants to do this, but I'm also terrified. My life is so far from where it was just a few months ago. I'm about to head to the airport and board a private plane to Fort Madison, where I will come face to face with a mass murderer. They keep assuring me I'm in no danger. There are guards, he will be chained, and he has been a model prisoner for 25 years now. Like all that is supposed to make me feel better. So much has happened since my last post. The pressure kept up the very next morning after Alicia proposed doing the Netflix update. Alicia had a million reasons why this would be good for us, and when she told me the estimate payout for it, I was mind blown. This could really set me up. I didn't last long and agreed to be part of the project. There were lawyers on the doorstep that very week and we were locked in. That's when things took a swift nosedive. You know when you should trust your gut, but don't, because what you're being sold or shown or promised is just too good to pass up. Well, if that was a person, it would be Alicia Curry West. Shortly after inking the Netflix deal, she came to me with a job offer. She wanted me to go on the road with her, doing the public speaking engagements and raising funds for the foundation. She sold it to me in so many ways. We could make up for lost time, we could really make a difference in kids' lives, we could honor my birth father, we could possibly get other TV deals, she would start me out at $100K a year, and much more. I didn't know what to say. I had been at my job for 3 years at this point, but that would be a huge raise. I ended up accepting, and told my boss that I wouldn't be returning. After I accepted, Alicia asked if I'd start calling her mom, and I agreed. I still had this sneaking feeling that something was off, but I ignored it. I mean, I had my real mom, she was rich, and she wanted me to have the same life she had. I began going to work with her the very same day. Over the last month we have mostly been planning speaking engagements and talking about the angle we would take. The thing that bothered me was she wanted to play up my life as really negative. It's like she wasn't lying about how I grew up, but wanted it to seem like I was abused, neglected, and mistreated. Always focusing on moving around, living in campers, denied access to society, she even wrote statements that implied physical abuse. I don't know what to think of Val and Kim anymore, but they were not evil. They treated me great and raised me the best they could. I don't want them slandered. It was after the first week of working with her that I really started to take notice that she was very self-centered. Her assistant seemed like she was always on the verge of tears and trying to anticipate Alicia's next move. She wasn't very nice to any of the other staff members either. I tried to be friendly with them, but they all seemed to get really nervous around me. After overhearing someone talking about how the bitch denied my raise, but brought her new little pet in at 3 times my salary, I began to wonder how much of her company/foundation was really dedicated to helping victims. The company finances, under the guise of trying to maximize our intake, which is weird because this is supposed to be a non-profit. She agreed, which I was surprised. She had only known me a few weeks, and I could get the vibe she was trying to be a mom, but to just let me get into anything I wanted seemed naively generous. Going through the books, I felt sick. It was all just a front really. Her whole marketing was that she was out in the schools, out in the neighborhoods, preaching doing the right thing. The reality was, speaking engagements were rarely done at all. In fact, from what I can tell, the dozen or so events she does at high schools and shelters a year appear to just be a marketing ploy. She makes most of her money from donations doing do-gooder events and dinners for rich people who want tax write-offs. I thought, okay, if this gets people more resources, more help, then I guess that's still worthwhile. I know the real world isn't all rainbows and butterflies. Maybe she backed off on the speaking and did more foundation event stuff because it gets more for the victims. No, not true. As I started doing the math on the disbursements, it seems only about 9% of every dollar collected goes to actual victims. This is a foundation that brings in close to $2.5 million annually. And last year only $210,000 went to any victims organization. I started looking deeper. The people who work here aren't getting paid anything. She offers a pretty good starting salary, but looking through the employee records, raises are few, far between, and slim at best. The operating costs were high, with most of that being in the form of fancy events to impress her rich donors. The largest piece of the pie appeared to go to Alicia. She listed as having a salary the same as the employees. But, she lives in a company home, has 3 luxury company vehicles, gives herself a ridiculously high per diem for any time she's out of the office. In the past few years she has traveled for conferences, speaking engagements, and company retreats to San Francisco, Paris, Tokyo, and a number of other places. When I asked about it, she didn't get defensive, she didn't angry, she didn't try to lie. She was proud, she bragged. She started laying it all out. Going out and taking a few for the team at a high school always meant bigger donations at the dinners and socials. She went on and on about how to max out donations. I think she was under the impression she was teaching me something. When we talked salaries, she explained, never pay someone the minimum, they'll always leave, because they can and not lose anything. You want to get them in with a good offer, then keep them through their own necessity. You got to give them just enough to live a little, just enough to make them reconsider leaving. Then you've got them for good. Her unethical business practices aside, I asked her how she felt about the people she was supposed to be helping. She didn't even comprehend what I meant. She truly believes she is doing everything she can for the victims, and that her foundation does everything it can for them. I asked about all the amenities she gives herself and she said, it's just her pay, she dedicates her life to helping others, she's earned all this. This woman is a total narcissist. Over the next couple weeks I did my best to contribute and be her little protégé. I was so appalled by what I had learned, I knew I had to do something. I didn't really know what, but something. That has meant weeks of playing along with Alicia. Here's a recap of things I've learned. She has had just about every form of plastic surgery, all medically necessary and covered by her company, of course. She also offered to get me new boobs, saying, you're young now but a little enhancement never hurt. She planned a 4-day, company, retreat to Aspen, because I'm from Colorado, and when I asked, why would we go there in the summer? She just said to consider it a birthday present. I said my birthday was in May, she said, no, it's not, it's July 9th. I hadn't really thought about that. Her plan was Aaron could join us. I said we should invite some staff as a thank you, and she laughed. Saying she never brings any of them. I pointed out that I had noticed others on previous retreats in the records. That's when she explained that she will often hire a guy she wants to fuck, her words exactly, a few days before, then take him on these company retreats, then let him go when they get back. I got dealt a huge loss though on the trip. I was sleeping in this way to extravagant Airbnb. When I hear a huge commotion from the bathroom. Aaron is there in a towel, Alicia is topless holding her big fake boobs trying to cover her nipples. Aaron is telling me she came in there like that, the shower is clear glass. He says she was asking him if he needed any help and to show her what he's got. Alicia is denying everything, saying she was getting herself ready and came in topless by accident, and that's when Aaron came on to her, asking her to join him. I know he wasn't lying. He was so upset. It came down to an ultimatum. Him or her, I wanted so much more with him, but I couldn't let her keep doing this. I had to say goodbye to Aaron. I still didn't know what I was going to do, but I couldn't just let her keep taking advantage of people. He left the trip, I tried to reach out, but I'm blocked. Goodbye, Aaron. This ended up being a blessing though. She now trusted me completely. I told her that we should do a PR campaign on our reunion. She loved the idea. We did this whole workup called I Am Ivy West. I also suggested we make it legally official, that I am her daughter. She was happy to do this, her lawyers made quick work of the process. We finally got to our first filming. It was going to be 3 filmed parts, an interview with the both of us. Then one with us and Chris. Last, a follow-up interview with us on our thoughts about facing Chris in person. The first interview was horrible. It was so much bashing of my parents, Val and Kim. Painting them as monsters. Alicia kept speaking for me when they would come up. The narrative she was pushing was she was saving me from my past. It was sick. Yes, they did something horrible, but they weren't horrible to me. But yet again, I had to go along with it. I keep telling myself if I want to make it all right, I have to keep going, but it's getting hard. The car is waiting for me. The next test is here. Wish me luck, and I'll update when it's over. I know you all want to know what happened, so I'll get right to it. Alicia was in the car sent to take us to the airport. She tried to make upbeat conversation. I could tell she was excited. I, however, was not. This eventually got her attention and she asked me what was wrong. I played it off, said, I'm just thinking about Aaron. She replied, sweetie, you're better off without him, he's not strong enough for women like us. That stung, but I pressed on, was my dad strong enough? She released a short laugh, not at all, although he had more backbone than I thought, he made me confess to Chris. Which ultimately got him killed. No, he was just a means to an end, honestly between just us, I'm not 100% sure he was your father. You were having an affair. I know I didn't hide my look of disgust. No, but that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy some extra fun, he traveled a lot for work, I'd treat myself to weekend getaways, sometimes things happened. I mean he's probably your father. She looked at me and noticed my expression. What did I hit a nerve? You'll learn at some point, one person isn't enough for anybody, not long term, everyone does it. I just learned the truth early. Besides, it runs in the family. Chris wasn't my father's kid and everyone knew it, except Chris. Why do you think I was everyone's favorite? I looked at her again even more shocked, she kept going, oh don't feel bad, my dad, he was having affairs too, it was funny because he liked the femboys, God he was such a freaky old man. He would donate to an anti-gay cause one day, then turn around and buy some 19-year-old guy the next. He was the first one to back up my aunt when she disowned Robert too. She laughed at that point. In disbelief I continued, who's Robert? She went on, my cousin, he was like 17 at the time of the fire, he came out to my aunt just before the holidays, she disowned him on the spot, so did my grandparents. If they hadn't, I guess he would been roasted the same as the others. It actually worked out for me, because not only did I get the life insurance for Billy, but also all my parents' assets, my aunt's assets, and my grandparents'. It was nearly $3 million. Robert came to see me at the hospital, but I had him thrown out. I didn't need that kind of image on top of all my other problems at the time. I looked at her and couldn't help it anymore, you were all awful. She frowned, Ivy, pull the stick out of your ass and grow up, we all did what we had to for the family. I just looked at her and said, Michelle. She said, what? I responded, my name is Michelle. That pissed her off, and I'm not gonna lie I got a sense of satisfaction. At very least I bought myself the silent treatment for the flight. We arrived and spent the night at a nearby hotel. I got to listen to Alicia bitch about it, guess it wasn't up to the standard she was accustomed to. The next day she was done with the silent treatment, and let me know she forgave me being rude the day before. We got to the prison and they took us into the interview room. They prepped us on some of the questions, and let us know how this was going to go. I told everyone I had a request. I wanted to shake his hand. Everyone seemed confused but the producer loved the idea. It took a little convincing but the security team agreed to loosen his restraints enough to let him shake, under the condition he would have a guard over each shoulder. I agreed. When we got into the room and were situated they brought him in. He was so unassuming. If you put him in a lineup of 100 random men and asked someone to pick out the multi-murderer he would be one of the last picked. They chained him to his seat, leaving just enough slack in the chain for him to raise his hands up enough to shake. I walked over to him and looked him in the eye. Our hands met and it was a surreal moment. He forever altered my life, for the better. How would I have been raised by those people? I saw his eyes react, and though we said nothing, I think he sensed I had learned about who she really was. The interview began. Chris was across from us maybe 15 to 20 feet away. The guards moved to the walls. Alicia immediately started with some very theatrical monologue about staring into the face of evil. I tired of it quickly. The producers asked so many questions of us. I was playing along, giving everyone what they wanted, when I finally noticed the tapping. Chris was tapping his leg the whole time. He was signaling me, he expected my father, my real father, would have taught me Morse code. He was right. It took me a minute but I realized what he was saying. Push, I was finally asked, Ivy, is there anything you want to say to Chris? I looked at my uncle and said, for the murder of Billy West, you deserve to be in here, but I want to thank you. If not for you I would have been raised by this awful person who sits beside me, instead of the great parents I had." At that point I pushed the button on my watch and the recording of everything Alicia has said over the months began to play. I had it organized so that the worst confessions played first, as I assumed she would quickly interrupt. She rose to her feet and squared up to me screaming, "You ungrateful bitch." I stayed seated and yelled up to her, "Don't talk to me you cruel, psychotic, manipulative whore." This enraged her and she grabbed me by the neck. This was exactly what I wanted her to do. I jumped to my feet and forward with a hard shove. She didn't expect that and went tumbling backwards, right into the lap of my Uncle Chris. I swear I heard him say, "Gotcha." It was quick, I have no idea how he hit it on himself. The sharp metal shard entered Alicia's throat, and he yanked hard backwards towards himself. The entire right side of her throat seemed to tear out. It was one of the most disgusting things I have ever seen. There was no saving her. She bled so much and so fast. Chris just laughed, and laughed as the guards pounced on him. I was rushed into another room. I'm back in my hotel room now, trying to make sense of everything, wondering why I don't feel guilty. I'm sure at some point all of this will catch up with me. But for now I'll take solace in the fact I'm not like her. I'm not anything like her. I am Michelle Kimberly Nolan, daughter of Val and Kim Nolan. I know it's been years, but after my last update, I finally broke down. In a span of 5 months I had lost my parents, learned I was kidnapped, that my uncle massacred all my biological relatives, reconnected with me birth mother, moved cities, started a new job, discovered she was a psychopath, lost my boyfriend, discovered all of my biological relatives were awful people, watched my birth mother get her throat ripped out by said uncle, and then I still had to do that damn documentary, which got changed from one 90-minute update, to a 2-part dive so they could go into Bio family's history and Alicia's foundation. Not much more there beyond what Alicia confessed in the car and over our time together. I started therapy immediately and continue even 4 years later, although it's now mostly to help me handle the pressure of running a large foundation. I inherited everything from Alicia. I decided to take it over completely. I was definitely not ready but managed to fake it till I made it. The staff helped tremendously, I think they appreciated the huge raises. My assistant no longer looks like she's trying to defuse a bomb every day. Overall things are going very well. I sold the company house, 2 of the cars, and cut back on per diem and trips. We restructured quite a bit. I mostly do speaking visits to high schools, shelters, etc. This is now the main focus of the company, although I did keep up with the galas and dinner for the elites, their donations just go so far, even if I hate these events. We're up to 47% of all proceeds now going to help victims of domestic abuse. We also founded the Billy West Memorial Scholarship for kids in the foster care system. I never met him, but I think he would be proud of me. I also have no intention of ever looking deeper into my parentage. Billy and Val are my real fathers, Kim is my real mother, that is good enough for me. I know you all want to know, sadly Aaron and I never reconnected. A couple months after the prison incident, I did manage to get in touch with him. I apologized for what happened and he let me explain myself. He was very sympathetic, but also told me how much it hurt. I cried a little while we talked, but I think we got a level of closure for both of us. He wasn't interested in restarting anything. He had begun dating someone else about 6 weeks earlier. We remain friends on social media. He ended up marrying that girl and she is mega pregnant right now with their first child. He posts how excited he is almost every day. I'm happy for him, he deserves it. I tracked down Robert, my great-aunt's son, an only known biological relative who isn't in prison, dead, or just a total POS. He has had a hard life being on his own since 17 but made the most of it. He's not rich, but has a good life. He lives in California, runs his own wellness business, and has been married to his husband Orlando for 10 years. I sent them a very late wedding gift. When he said he couldn't accept so much from someone he just met, I told him to think of it as his long overdue inheritance. We still message, and last year I got to meet him face to face for the first time. As for me, I enjoy the city life and have been dating David, 38M, for the last year. He is a professor in the Department of Human Genetics at the University of Chicago. He always jokes that he never thought anyone would top his crazy family, but then he met his best friend in college, Tim 36M, and thought no one would ever top Tim's crazy family. Now he's met me, and says he is going to avoid all new people for the rest of his life because he doesn't want to meet the person who can top my story, lol. We are talking about moving in together within the next year. Anyway, that's my update. Almost forgot, Chris got another life sentence tacked on for killing Alicia, but when you're already serving 8 life sentences, who really cares? He went back to not allowing visitors. I may try to write him soon, I just can't figure out how to thank someone for murder. If I figure that out, I'll let you all know, lol.